So I keep seeing these conspiracy theory / obscure lore Iceberg explained videos going around. If you don't know what these are, well, the meme's a couple years old, but it's had something of a resurgence last year, all stemming from the Super Mario 64 community. And since there hasn't been one for Star Wars yet, well, I figured I might as well hop on the trend to lend my expertise. Looks like my useless encyclopedic knowledge of Star Wars isn't so useless after all, right? Right? Yes, Darth Jar Jar. This, theory came around in 2015, and it was quickly adopted as a meme. The original poster, a Reddit user with the username /u/Lumpawaroo, made a magnum opus of a post showing how Jar Jar's quote-unquote comedic and absurd movements may actually be calculated acts, much like that of a drunken fist wushu practitioner. The thematic meaning is also of interest, a sort of dark mirror to Yoda, a character that appears simple and or annoying, but actually turns out to be a great and powerful master of their art, a common trope in mythology. Lumpawaroo then adds that it's likely that Lucas simply abandoned that plotline, which wouldn't be unheard of him to do. His extrapolation on that being the reason for Dooku's hasty introduction in Episode 2 is also very well founded. However, his conclusion on Jar Jar being the mastermind of the sequels turned out to be incorrect, obviously. A literature professor named Joseph Campbell, in his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, described a concept called the hero's journey, also known as the monomyth, a sort of archetypal storyline template which everything from the Epic of Gilgamesh to, well, Star Wars follows. A New Hope is often considered to be one of the prime examples of a story going through the 17 stages of the template. Since the release of Revenge of the Sith, many people have thought that Padme's reasons for dying to be hard to believe, and that in reality it was Palpatine who caused her death, which would obviously benefit him in his manipulation of Vader. A plausible idea, though it should be noted that losing the will to live is a real thing. Psychogenic or psychosomatic death has been recorded by actual medical journals. People have long found it very convenient that the astromech unit that Luke and Owen bought just so happened to malfunction the second they got it. It seems official authors have had similar ideas. In the comic Skippy the Jedi Droid, it turned out that R5 was a Force-sensitive droid who sensed that R2-D2 needed to get to Obi-Wan in order to save the galaxy, and chose to self-destruct in order to have this come to pass. Now, let me be clear. No matter how many clickbait articles try to use this as a talking point for why the Star Wars Legends continuity was unsalvageable and utter trash, this story was never part of official canon. It has specifically been designated as part of the Infinities continuity. That is a what-if story. Although, it seems in the current Disney canon, this specific R5 unit was repaired and bought by Pelimato in The Mandalorian. You can tell by the scorch marks on the chassis. I love that kind of subtle referencing. Oh, come on. If you don't know this one, what are you even doing here? People have pointed out to Vader singling out Fett and telling him,
"No disintegrations,"
to be evidence that it was really him who killed the Lars family. Supporters of said theory also point to the addition of Fett in the special edition of A New Hope, which would indicate that he was present on Tatooine at the time. In Legends, this was clearly not the case, as their murder was performed by the stormtroopers of Zeta Squadron, under the direct orders of Darth Vader, who felt it justified due to what he perceived as their failure to protect his mother 2 decades prior. In canon, there aren't many details around on that, so who knows, but for all his ruthlessness, Boba's not really the type to just murder innocent civilians. In several countries, numerous people have designated themselves as Jedi in the religious section of the census forms for various reasons, ranging all the way from acts of protest against particular aspects of the census to simply just joking. It's a well-known fact that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are very close friends, and have frequently referenced each other's works in cameos. In Spielberg's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the eponymous E.T. points to a child in a Yoda costume and states, "Home, home, home." Lucas later returned the gesture, featuring aliens of E.T.'s species in the Galactic Senate in The Phantom Menace. Expanded Universe material identified their senator as Grebliops. Spielberg backwards, duh. And their species, the Asogians, hailed from the planet Brodo-Asogi, where dreams of extragalactic exploration had been birthed. To those fans stupid enough to do so, such as myself, this has provided a crucial element in helping identify the Star Wars galaxy using actual astrocartography. So, the E.T. soundtrack points to E.T. being 3 million light-years from home, and our galaxy has a 100,000 light-year diameter, meaning that Brodo-Asogi must be approximately 3.1 million light-years from us. However, we also know that the Star Wars galaxy is 120,000 light-years from us, and there is no spiral galaxy of that size at that distance. You know, it's times like this where I have to step back and tell myself to stop thinking so hard about this. This is an idea that has been around since Attack of the Clones, and possibly popularized by the hilarious Auralnauts videos.
Can I ask you something weird?
Yeah.
Do you think Obi-Wan would go out with me?
The idea is that, well, Obi-Wan is Luke and Leia's real father. We straight up know that's not the case, but whatever. George Lucas has straight up stated that the Battle of Endor was influenced by the Vietnam War, in the aspect of a small guerrilla force taking on a military with overwhelmingly superior technology. Lucas was vehemently opposed to the Vietnam War, and like many artists, chose to reflect that in his art. I'll let you draw your own conclusion from these pictures. An old theory, dated likely back to the 80s. In A New Hope, Old Ben briefly talks about his participation in the Clone Wars, but there were very few details given at all for decades after that on what they actually were. So, some people theorize that Obi-Wan was actually one of the eponymous clones, with the alphanumeric designation OB-1, which he later adapted into a proper name for himself. Of course, that idea was thoroughly debunked by the prequels, but funnily enough, the concept somewhat lived on in actual Clone Wars media, with many clone troopers adopting names based on their batch number, like RC-1207 becoming Sev, and CT-5555 becoming Fives. A theory developed between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. Many supposed leaks for Episode 9 involved time travel, and many people noted the striking resemblance between Daisy Ridley and Priscilla August, coming to the conclusion that Rey would travel back in time, likely through the world between worlds, which I'll explain later, adopt the name Shmi, and give birth to Anakin. Obviously, this did not happen. The implication from the theater scene from Revenge of the Sith is that Darth Plagueis' shenanigans resulted in the creation of Anakin, who apparently was a virgin birth. The Darth Plagueis book, however, heavily implies somewhat of the opposite, that he was born by the will of the Force to bring an end to the abominations made by, and the machinations set in place by, the actions of Plagueis. Of course, that book is solely part of the Abandoned Legends continuity, but Many elements from that book have been brought into Disney canon by its author, James Luceno, but who knows? Also, absolutely outstanding book, by the way, probably one of, if not the best singular book in the entire Star Wars library, so check it out. This was a short film that was apparently aired before screenings of The Empire Strikes Back and was lost for decades before it was rediscovered in 2011. So I apologize to any Turkish viewers for butchering your language, but in 1982, a film called Dünyayı Kurtaran Adam is now popularly referred to as Turkish Star Wars abroad. It was an extraordinarily low-budget movie, and it utilized sound effects and even footage from Star Wars all throughout it. It's often considered one of the worst films ever made, but to be fair, one must consider the historic context around it. Turkey was undergoing massive political upheaval at the time, and the US-made films were difficult to get a hold of, so they were often remade with a Turkish cast. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what this theory is referring to. I guess Han shooting after Greedo would reflect more favorably on the Alliance. I'm not sure what else could be construed as propaganda. So, depending on when this Iceberg meme was made, it could refer to several different things. Either the fully voiced unfinished animatics released on StarWars.com, or if it's more recent, the ones that still remain unreleased even after the release of the final season in 2020, namely the Cad Bane and Boba Fett arc and the Kashyyyk arc. I've never read Aragon, so I really can't say, but a cursory Google search shows that there's many similarities in their story structures. Whether this is just a hero's journey thing or more in-depth, again, I really can't say. The line between ripping off and homage is a blurry one, but I don't know. Yep, Jabba was originally just a dude. In deleted scenes from A New Hope, he was portrayed by an actor named Declan Mulholland, but supposedly, he was always meant to be replaced by a Chewbacca-like shaggy alien in post-production. I can't really find any info on this one either. Lucas was supposedly very into cars as a young man, so maybe the speeder scenes in the Solo movie are referencing that? This is yet another idea from an Infinities comic. Again, non-canon. So, in a comic entitled Into the Great Unknown, the Millennium Falcon makes a blind hyperspace jump and ends up in the Sol System, crashing on Earth, specifically in the Pacific Northwest. Han and Chewie are attacked by Native Americans, and Han sadly succumbs to his injuries. Chewbacca, who, of course, has a massively long lifespan as a Wookiee, inspires the legends of the Sasquatch, aka Bigfoot. 126 years later, Indiana Jones, Short Round, and a Native American guide find the Falcon's crash site, but decide to leave it be, as Chewie watches from the trees. Wait, if it's 126 years before Indiana Jones's time, and seeing Short Round's age, that means that timeline-wise, Han's lifetime, aka the films, would have been in the early 1800s, so the BBY/ABY calendar, well, I suppose there's possible time dilation to account for, but, no, it happened again. Anyway. One of many pieces of cancelled media. This novel would have been part of the Clone Wars multimedia project, and it would feature Shaak-Ti saving clone POWs from a separatist-controlled planet. The basic premise is confirmed to still have happened in the Legends continuity, having been referenced in Star Wars Insider articles. So, supposedly, the Pink Floyd album, Dark Side of the Moon, links up pretty well with The Force Awakens. This has been done with The Wizard of Oz for ages, but this is really interesting. I'll place a link in the description for you to see more. The greatest tragedy of our time. People had been clamoring for a gritty piece of Star Wars media for a while, and a game entitled Star Wars 1313, revealed at E3 2012, looked like it was going to deliver, exploring the eponymous level 1313 on Coruscant. It was going to be rated M, no less. However, issues like delays due to George Lucas mandating the main character be changed to a young Boba Fett slowed things down, and when LucasArts went under in 2013, it was sadly abandoned. Still, the love for the game lives on, with some amazing pieces of art based on it coming to life, such as mods for different games as well as cosplay. Since then, a small number of screenshots of different builds and such have been revealed. Believe it or not, some still hold out hope for some sort of leak of some build, and I applaud you crazy legends. So, a lot of people are really weirded out by the presence of Earth animals, specifically varying types of horses in the Ewok films. However, even disregarding humans, there's still quite a few different types of real-life creatures in the films, such as rats in Jabba's palace, as well as Asian water monitors, green iguanas, boa constrictors, California king snakes, several types of pythons, and who knows what else on Dagobah. This is one of the sillier parts of the old expanded universe. The 7th issue of the Ewok comics featured Mount Sorrow, a sentient mountain that was eternally depressed. Relatable, am I right? Anyway, it's been something that people poke fun at online for ages, though since the EU decanonization, it's often been used as an example for why the EU was always stupid, which I take issue with. Let's be real here, though. The whole Ewoks side franchise that came around in the 80s is clearly a desperate attempt to copy the Smurfs formula and really shouldn't be taken seriously, but I digress. If you have to come up with an explanation for your headcanon, I really like the idea that Mount Sorrow is actually a sedentary Burkna, one of the many mineral-based lifeforms in Star Wars media. So, the new Disney canon seems to lean in really hard on the whole Harry Potter style, the saber chooses the wielder type of thing, with some sort of implication that kyber crystals are to a certain extent alive and or self-aware. This is one of the first big differences universe-wise between new canon and Legends, at least on an aspect that isn't related to the timeline, and I don't know. I kind of like the whole bleeding crystal thing, that red lightsabers are corrupted by Darksiders and whatnot, though I'm still partial to the old synthetic crystal explanation. It's a matter of opinion, it's whatever. I'm not actually sure what this one refers to. There's no references at all to the Trade Federation in the sequel trilogy aside from a B-1 droid, although background lore has stated that the Resistance uses Separatist ships for training simulations, and that factions called the Confederacy of Corporate Systems and New Separatist Union arose following the Galactic Civil War, so may still be around during the sequel time period? George Lucas's original rough draft script, which was written in 1973 and 74, had many differences from the final product. The Star Wars, as it was called, involved the Starkiller family's fight against the Empire, and had many concepts that would be reused much later, such as the name Valorum and the planet Utapau. Rogue One also revisited some of the original concepts, like the story beginning with an Imperial ship touching down and hunting down a family attempting to hide from the Empire. just another example of real-life animals in Star Wars, seen on Naboo during episodes 1 and 2. According to IMDb, this is some sort of documentary about a Colorado town highly involved with the US's space exploration. I have no idea what it actually has to do with Star Wars. This may be a reference to a Robot Chicken skit where clone troopers express a desire to bone, or to fangirls online shipping clones together. Either way, it's incest and it's weird, and stop it. I also have a little clue on this one. There's several things called overlords in Star Wars, though its only plural use seems to be from the Clone Wars episode. Not sure what merits it being this far down, though I guess some of the concepts presented throughout the whole Mortis arc are pretty esoteric. As mentioned before, there's been tons and tons of theories on Anakin's parentage. Again, in Legends, he was conceived by the Force to return balance to it in response to the actions of Darth Plagueis and Sidious. Though in canon, there's been some hints that it was the latter that was more involved, which is kind of dumb, but whatever. Yeah, I got no clue on this one. So the Rebels TV series introduced the world between worlds, which is a concept that's been of much discussion. I personally find it very intriguing and done well. When you explain it, it sounds dumb, but the way they pulled it off, I like it. Basically, the world between worlds is an area existing outside of time and space with infinite doorways throughout it linking to all moments. It's very much connected to the ones of Mortis and the Force, but left vague and mysterious, as these sort of things should be. There was a lot of talk before the release of Episode 9 about it featuring prominently there, but, well, again, that obviously didn't happen. Going by the original films, stormtroopers, believe it or not, are actually excellent shots. Analysis has indicated that they actually outperform the US Marine Corps in their marksmanship, even when firing from the hip. The joke, of course, comes from the scenes aboard the Death Star, where they can't seem to hit the broadside of a barn, but Tarkin explicitly states that they let the rebels get away, having placed a tracking device on the Millennium Falcon. Of course, it's become such a trope now that it's looped around, so now many portrayals of stormtroopers, most notably in Rebels and The Mandalorian, now do have them being completely and utterly incompetent, so, yeah. Yeah, I don't see it. I assume it's talking about parallels between Star Wars and the Protestant Reformation, which I don't see. Granted, my knowledge of that particular part of history is somewhat lacking, but even doing some research, I'm not seeing any connections there. Christmas in the Stars was a 1980 Star Wars-themed Christmas album with Anthony Daniels providing voiceover for 3PO, and is actually pretty funny. Obviously it's non-canon, but for the sake of the joke, I guess it would make Christmas, reindeers, and Santa Claus part of the Star Wars mythos. This is a reference to old theories in the Song of Ice and Fire / Game of Thrones fanbase, where the parentage of particular characters was discussed, but people simply used initials in order to not spoil for newcomers. The big one was R plus L equals J, which turned out to be true in the show, but has yet to be confirmed in the books, Come on, Martin. It's been a decade? Anyway, I'm assuming this is a joke theory, implying that Rey is the result of Luke and Leia. Yeah, no. A trading card released in 1977 had a picture of 3PO where one of his pieces is placed and looks, yeah. Apparently it's the result of a piece of the costume falling off at just the wrong time as the picture was shot. Whew, boy. It's well known now that the sequel trilogy is a colossal mess, in great part to not having a cohesive plan in place on where the story was going. So, what were the original ideas before the Disney buyout? What did George Lucas think? Well, every time he's been asked about it, he seems to have a different answer. Sometimes it's about exploring a micro-universe of the midi-chlorians. Others, it's about Luke having to deal with the revived, yet again, Darth Maul, along with Darth Talon, who George really seems to have the hots for. I mean, I can't blame him, but anyway, there's even concept art for The Force Awakens featuring her, so who knows what bits and pieces actually came from him. One way or another, I'm not sure I'd want to really watch these either. It's, yeah. So this is really funny nowadays, but people took it seriously back in the day. So this is just one of the many theories that people had about Fett back in the day. So some people thought, is he the other Yoda talked about? Or is he actually secretly Luke's mother with a voice modulator? It may seem odd to us nowadays, but there was apparently really rampant speculation since Fett was featured so heavily in promotional material and merchandise and stuff. Like, very disproportionate to the amount of screen time he actually had. Another piece of the Legends expanded universe, which people like to make fun of, but makes sense in context. So in the climax of The Last Command, the third book of the Thrawn trilogy, which basically birthed the EU as we know it, Luke comes face to face with a clone of himself, made by recovering the DNA from his hand, which was chopped off during the duel on Bespin. So the author, the legendary Timothy Zahn, decided to name him Luke with 2 U's, since as a piece of written media, it was a quick and easy way to distinguish the two, instead of having to write Luke's clone or the clone of Luke each time. Sure, kinda silly, but it makes sense in context. In The Mandalorian, Pelimato uses G's, which is a shortening of Jesus, so... Mad Magazine, issue 230 from 1981, had a segment called The Star Wars Log, the master plan for the future of space films, which is obviously a joke, but some concepts are eerily similar to later content, namely the Force being the father of a Skywalker. So one has to wonder... Now, this is something I've considered doing a whole video on, and I guess I technically did back when some friends and I did the Cantina Roundtable podcast, but anyway, Alien Exodus is a scrap novel or novel series which intended on tying together all of George Lucas's works into one cohesive mythos, and to showcase the origin of humanity within the Star Wars universe. Basically, it would have entailed a group of dissidents escaping from the dystopian Earth featured in THX 1138, which was Lucas's first full-length film, including a descendant of the protagonist of American Graffiti, another film. The humans enter a wormhole, which not only takes them to the galaxy far, far away, but backwards in time. The humans meet numerous different familiar races like Rhodians, Gamorreans, and Bith, but are enslaved by aliens called Varlians. Generations later, humans and other slave species like Twi'lek, Mon Calamari, Celestins, and many others stage a revolt on the planet Forhelnor, and the Varlians devolve into the Hutts. I'm skipping over a ton, but that's the main lore stuff. Honestly, I keep the basics of this plot as part of my headcanon, as something that occurred even before the rise of the Rakata, maybe concurrent with the Qua. Just a really interesting look at the possible origins of galactic civilization. So, in the infamous holiday special, the Wookiee homeworld is called Kashyyyk, but since then has always been identified as Kashyyyk. I have no clue what this one is about, might be. I touched upon this briefly prior. Well, the planet Mortis is integral to an arc of the Clone Wars show and a plotline in the Fate of the Jedi novels. Basically, it's a structure where a trio of highly powerful Force sensitives reside, with some sort of connection to the Celestials. The daughter represents the light side, the son the dark side, and the father maintains balance. Even though the concept of balance in Star Wars is really weird and not at all what the term itself implies, even though, I don't know, man. Han Solo famously says,
"Then I'll see you in hell."
In Episode 5, which, like several of the past things described, seems like a real-world reference. EU material has stated that it's a concept in Corellian mythology, but, yee. Okay, so this makes me chuckle every time. The crux of the idea is that there are actually two Lukes, Luke Prime and Bigger Luke, explaining a perceived discrepancy in Luke's height in comparison to Han in different scenes. Gee, it's almost like people change height in a form of locomotion referred to as walking, and there's something called perspective in the cameras. This has to be some sort of joke about absurd fan theories analyzing the most minute details in the films and jumping to absurd conclusions from them, which granted is what we in the Star Wars fanbase do best. So, you know the Cantina Band, yes? Well, they're called Figrid-an and the Modal Nodes. Their genre? Jizz. No, I'm not kidding. So, every time you listen to them, they're putting jizz in your ear. Yep. I've never seen anything about this. There are several living planets and legends like Zonama-Sekot and Yuuzhan-Tar, and canon has this, but I don't think there's ever been any implication of Corellia being one. The odd thing about the Corellian system is the odd orbits of the planets, which were believed to have been manipulated with by the Celestials using Centerpoint Station, a device which basically acted as a colossal tractor beam. So this Reddit post seems to point out that the band Weezer's history seems to mirror that of the Star Wars series. Okay. This is a hilarious joke theory, I assume. Using out-of-context facts and logical assumptions, the article concludes that the humans in Star Wars are actually insectoids with a hive-based social structure, using things such as how females are almost always in positions of power in the films. Look this one up if you want a good laugh. Yeah, I'm not sure what this one's about either, sorry. Obviously, it's a reference to the famous glorious Virgin versus Chad meme, but I can't find one of this particular kind. Might also be referencing an old comedic web series called Chad Vader Day Shift Manager. Since then, the guy who did his voice, Matt Sloan, has more or less become the go-to guy Lucasfilm goes to voice Vader when they don't have the budget for James Earl Jones. I guess the idea is that there's some sort of Mandela effect and the special edition changes were always there? The Journal of the Wills has always been an object of intense mystery in Star Wars. The very first outline of what would become Star Wars was actually entitled Journal of the Wills Part 1. What exactly the Wills are has been a source of debate amongst fans for decades. The midichlorians? Yoda's species? The Celestials? The Force Priestesses from the Clone Wars? Anyway, I suppose the real in the title implies that it's some sort of artifact that George Lucas found and then adapted his series from, which is absurd but amusing idea that I'm sure many people entertained as kids. Disney has been in control the whole time. That's how Lucas made his fortune off of merchandise. It's been there the whole time! All currently existing holiday special copies are from VHS records from the first and only broadcast on November 17, 1978, and has never been aired or distributed officially. So, how do we know that that was the real one? An old Facebook meme where Spanish speakers misidentified Boba as Magneto from the X-Men series, and whoever attempted to correct them misspelled, or it was some foot fetishist who also has a thing for Boba, which, okay.
One of my favorite shots in the movie, just those two fingers touching. It's the closest thing we'll get to a sex scene in a Star Wars movie.
Okay. One of the greatest mysteries in all of Star Wars. We've seen a handful of members of his species like Yaddle and Vandar Tokare, and more recently and more famously Grogu, aka the Child, aka Baby Yoda, but the actual name, homeworld, and specifics remain shrouded in mystery. Like mentioned prior, many have thought that the species may be the Wills, though apparently George Lucas has denied this. Lots of people speculated that The Mandalorian was going to head in that direction, but I'm glad they didn't. I guess this is a reference to the medieval found footage conspiracy theories and or how the Great Hyperspace War has only been seen in comics and novel formats? So that's the end of the Iceberg, but there are a couple more things that I'd like to talk about that weren't on the list. So, there was a 1987 Star Wars game released only in Japan, which was very interesting. And by interesting, I mean weird as hell. One of the most notoriously odd aspects is the presence of four monstrous Lord Vaders: Gyausu Beda, Kuradosu Beda, Sasori Beda, and Wampa Beda. The fight always begins with them identical to the actual Vader, but then they take on these monster forms. Also, can I just say that Gyausu is totally ripped off from Ridley from the Metroid series? For more info, I'd check out the Angry Video Game Nerds video on it. So, back in the Obi-Wan segment, I mentioned how before the prequels there was little info on the Clone Wars. Little, but not none. And what there was pretty heavily contradictory with what came about later on. One of the old Marvel comics claimed the involvement of the Mandalorians in the conflict, but still kept what actually occurred pretty vague. The very same pages that did so showed Leia as being present, which would make them a relatively recent event, but most other content seemed to believe that the wars took place more like 3 decades prior. Most of the vague references there seemed to treat the eponymous clones as enemies of the Jedi as opposed to their allies, even in the lead up to Attack of the Clones. Although in a roundabout way Revenge of the Sith did make that so. There was also an abandoned storyline for a toy series called The Power of the Force, which involved a genetic terrorist called Atha Prime, described as one of the architects of the Clone Wars, leading his clone warriors. Again, this was abandoned, but several aspects of the story ended up in little places here and there, most notably in the excellent little novella Skywalker's A Clone Wars Story. So, a YouTuber with no actual username released a series where he ruminates on the nature of the Force and the themes of Star Wars in general. The philosophy of Kreia and the failure of the Grey Jedi are phenomenal on their own and showcase a massive understanding of the universe, but the video The Foundations of Star Wars is something else entirely. Quite frankly, I'm gonna be honest.
I'm kind of retarded.
I'm too dumb to understand a lot of it, but this is good stuff. I really disagree with a lot of the conclusions he makes, especially at the end, but I nonetheless think that this is pretty much essential watching for anyone who wants to think about Star Wars on a deeper level. The thesis can be summed up with,
let go, your conscious self.
Let go, Luke.
Let go of your hate.
It is time for you to let go.
Sometimes we must let go of our pride.
You must let that ship go.
Let her go.
Let go of everything you fear to lose.
So this would be best described as the Silmarillion of Star Wars. So, circa 2001, author Joseph Bongiorno was going to write a story called Supernatural Encounters in the Star Wars Universe, which aimed to explain many of the more fantastical and esoteric elements from Star Wars lore, like the Bedlam spirits, which were actually made by famous comic author Alan Moore, no less, and Wutzek and other beings of immense, seemingly unexplainable power. It was going to be published in the Star Wars Gamer magazine, but that magazine ended its run, so the article went unpublished for almost 2 decades. Bongiorno still continued to work on it, adding details and information from new material, until it was finally published online in 2018. It is, quite frankly, absurd in its detail. I consider myself pretty dang well versed in even the most obscure aspects of the Star Wars universe, and even I had to keep a Wikipedia tab open to figure everything out. It very satisfactorily ties all those very different pieces of lore together into a cohesive plot, which is worthy of praise on its own, but the sheer number of references and explanations for odd things in other stories elevate it even higher. Now, Lucasfilm Limited never technically licensed it after the edits were made, so it still isn't technically part of the Legends continuity, but it very well should be. And yeah, Mr. Bongiorno, I applaud you. So this is the deepest Star Wars goes. So the concept artist team from Revenge of the Sith got together and published some of their concepts, along with some original ideas, in a collection of 11 stories called Star Wars Visionaries. All of them feature stunning artwork, and I highly recommend you get your hands on a copy. But a lot of the stories are pretty trippy to begin with, but one particular story stands out. One told with no words, no named characters, no familiar locations. This story is the Fourth Precept. I'll simply showcase all of the pages on screen. So that was something, wasn't it? So the real question is, what does it mean? An abstract representation of the never-ending internal conflict in the Force? The final battle between the light and dark sides at the end of time? Or is it the beginning of the universe, the creation of the Force? I mean, that final panel obviously points to midichlorians, but what does it mean? Hell, I even came across this. If the Rebels team really did make a reference there, bravo, jeez. But again, the meaning. Some have interpreted the title to be the fourth segment of the Jedi Code, which is there is no chaos, there is harmony, which I could very well see being the case, though I might as well share my interpretation. Page 1 simply shows the split between the dark and light sides of the Force. Page 2 shows the conflicts creating monstrosities, like those shown in Supernatural Encounters. Page 3 might very well just be evolution, with panel 1 being pre-life with the planet forming, like during the Hadean on Earth. Panel 2 is early marine life, like the Cambrian on Earth. Panel 3 is complex terrestrial life, like the Carboniferous on Earth. And panel 4 is sapient life achieving spaceflight. Page 4 is just entropy. Everything ends. And finally, page 5 is where balance is truly achieved. Of course, like I said before, balance is an odd, misleading concept in Star Wars, so who even knows? But yeah, that's that. So if you stuck around this long, wow, thanks. I hope I was able to inform and or entertain. Thank you so much for watching. Stick around if you're a subscriber who's wondering why my uploads are so infrequent. So yeah, I'm just gonna go unscripted. I'm gonna be honest. I really struggle with motivation and anxiety and stuff, and like I can barely get out of bed most days. But I just seeing you guys' comments and stuff really does brighten up my day. I wanted to say thank you for all the nice comments you guys have given me. I read them all, and it's you guys that keep me going. But aside from that, I've just been swamped with college work, and it looks like it's just gonna get worse these coming semesters, but hopefully I'll get some time to make stuff for you guys. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you all. May the Force be with you always.